Tuesday, November 28th, 5 a.m. in the East. We're live in this hour with the Pope's trip to Myanmar and in London with more on the royal engagement. Don't you think the world just needs a little love right now?
Love, sweet love.
It's a story that I just can't get enough of. But first, let's start with what's happening on Capitol Hill. Republican leadership in deal-making mode as the party tries desperately to pass some tax bill. The Senate Budget Committee meets to consider the measure this afternoon. Now, they face a problem. Nearly a dozen Republican senators have voiced concern with various degrees with this proposal, and two, Ron Johnson, Bob Corker, among the 12 Republicans on the Budget Committee. If GOP leaders cannot bring Johnson and Corker on board, they may choose to postpone today's vote to avoid a public failure.
To that end, President Trump will join Republican senators for lunch today, right before that Budget Committee meeting. Satisfying all the Republicans' concerns with the tax bill, potentially a very difficult task. And they've only $80 billion to work with and still stay below the $1.5 trillion deficit target that will let them pass the bill without a single Democratic vote. Our coverage this morning begins with Phil Mattingly on Capitol Hill.
Well, Christine and Dave, you can stop me if you've heard this before, but Republicans don't have the votes for a major legislative initiative that they want done as soon as the end of this week. And that means Republican leaders right now are scrambling. Here's kind of the baseline right now that they're working with. There are at least a half a dozen senators who still have major problems with their tax overhaul proposal. Now, if you talk to GOP leadership aides, they believe that by the end of this week, they'll be able to get the votes they need to move this forward. Remember, they have 52 Republican senators in the chamber. They can only afford to lose 2 and still pass a vote. Let's run down what some of the major issues right now are. You have people like Senator Ron Johnson, Senator Steve Daines. Their issues are when it comes to pass-through entities, essentially business entities that pay their taxes through the individual side. Now, both the House and the Senate bill try to address this issue with a major cut in the rate as it currently stands. Johnson and Daines say it doesn't go far enough. They're looking for changes. Changes, I'm told, are being made. Then you have what you could commonly refer to as the deficit caucus. People like James Lankford, Bob Corker, Jeff Flake, individuals who are very concerned how much this $1.5 trillion tax proposal will add to the deficit in the long term. Now, guys, it goes even further than that. You have Senator Susan Collins of Maine. She's made very clear that the inclusion of the repeal of the individual mandate from Obamacare, that's problematic. She also wants the state and local tax deduction to at least be somewhat added back in. Currently, it's repealed in the Senate bill. Take a look at what the House bill has. That's probably where this is going to end up. There's a compromise there for property taxes capped at $10,000. Aides tell me that's probably where they might end up in the end. And then, of course, you have Senator John McCain, obviously the famous thumbs down that killed the health care bill. Well, Senate leaders don't really know where he stands on this. Voted against the 01 and 03 Bush tax cuts, clearly a deficit hawk, but also, as always, has concerns about the process. Here's kind of the bottom line here. Republican leaders need to move quickly, and the things that they need to do are kind of contradictory. You need to add money for some senators as other senators raise deficit concerns. How they figure out a way to square those issues right now in the next couple of days is going to be crucial as to whether or not this has a future. You want to know where the first test it's going to be? This afternoon in the Senate Budget Committee. They are scheduled to mark up the tax proposal before it goes to the Senate floor. Who's on that committee? Senator Ron Johnson, Senator Bob Corker. Republicans on that committee hold a 1-seat advantage. If either of those senators vote against it, the bill will go down. So stay tuned. Dave and Christine?
All right, I'll be looking for his updates minute by minute all day today. Thank you, Phil Mattingly. A Republican leadership facing a similar struggle, answering concerns of some members without losing support of others. And there are 2 major concerns, the deficit and the fate of pass-through businesses. Now, the latter worries Senators Ron Johnson and Steve Daines. Both want bigger tax cuts for so-called pass-through entities. Pass-throughs can be small businesses or sometimes large firms with many employees, but all pay taxes through the individual tax rate, not the corporate rate. The Senate bill allows pass-throughs to deduct 17.4% from their taxable income. But there's the problem. It means the highest earners pay more than the proposed 20% corporate rate. So Senator Johnson says this favors corporations over small business. He wants to increase the deduction, but that will cost serious money and runs counter to what the deficit hawks want. The deficit, of course, is the difference between how much the government takes in revenue and what it spends. The current Senate bill adds $1.4 trillion to the deficit over 10 years. The GOP says economic growth will eventually pay for this plan. But Senator Bob Corker, among others, worries that may not be the case. What if that doesn't happen? And then you've got tax cuts that are blowing a hole in the budget. He wants to include a provision to raise taxes if revenue falls short. So far, independent estimates show the bill on the table right now doesn't hit the GOP's target growth, Dave.
This is a big day for the Republican agenda. Let's bring in CNN political analyst Julian Zelizer to the conversation. He's a historian and professor at Princeton University. Good morning.
Good morning.
To you, sir.
Good morning. How are you?
We're good. This is make or break, really, for the Republican agenda today, in particular, because of that budget committee vote. So the difficulty is you've got roughly a dozen senators that have concerns. And to Christine's point, they all want to take care of various groups, right? But on the other hand, each time you take care of one of those groups, you impact the deficit, which concerns people like Bob Corker and runs afoul of Senate rules. So given that dynamic, how in the world do they get this thing through?
Well, they're going to try to give things away. That's what you do in tax politics.
Sure.
At the very end, you try to give benefits, but you're right. They're running into one big problem, and it's called the deficit. The deficit matters so that they can use this rule, the reconciliation process, that prevents a filibuster, and it also matters for the economy. And the problem is, if they give anything else away right now for a bill that's already going to blow up the deficit, it's going to get even worse. So somehow they have to satisfy many factions